Hello everyone! I hope you are going well. In my previous video, I present you a visual difference between KDE 6 and KDE 5.27. We saw some new feature of KDE version 6. And we saw that in the KDE system setting, there has been a menu restructuration. So I decided to present you the KDE 6 system settings. So this video will be useful if you want to see the new system setting present in KDE 6, and it will be useful too if you need help to find an option in the system setting. Honestly, I think this new menu is very well structured and it is intuitive. So to begin this video, we will go to the system panel. So when we open the system setting, the first menu is about the mouse and the touchpad. If I click on it, I have new specific category about the mouse and the touchpad. On the screen edge, I can configure an action when I send the mouse to a specific zone configured here. It is a point on the screen border. In my case, I configured the left corner, and the action I put it is to show all windows open on my desktop, on my current desktop. So you can configure an action to the top left corner, to the top right corner, the bottom left corner, the top center, and every place we see here. And you just have to configure an action when you move the mouse to that zone. And the touchpad menu, it is useful if you have a laptop, if you have a touchpad on your laptop. You can configure different options like the speed of the mouse. In my case, I have a virtual machine, so I do not have a touchpad on this virtual machine. About the touchpad, you can also configure how you can scroll the mouse. On my case, when my two finger is on the touchpad and I move up to the down or down to the up, it will scroll the page. I can also invert the mouse. It will invert the scrolling direction. In the mouse menu, you can, for example, configure the left-handed mode. You can also configure the mouse speed, and you can choose the invert mode. The keyboard menu is to configure the keyboard, to choose a keyboard model. If you want the numlock to be always activate when your KDE session starts. In my case, I always configure it to be automatically activate when I start my session. It's good to note that it will not activate the numlock on the login page, the place where the system asks you to enter your username and your password. This setting is just when your KDE Plasma session will start. So if you want it to be activated automatically on the login screen, you have to modify another configuration. You can, for example, modify the SSDM config file. SDDM is the login manager used by many Linux distributions using KDE as graphical interface. In the Layout tab, you can configure the keyboard language. At the bottom, if you check Configure Layout, you can choose one or more language and class them by priority. So the one at the top will have the highest priority of use. In the switching policy, it is possible if you want this change to be effect on your session globally or to this desktop. You can also choose only on some application. We have several parameters available here. To configure a shortcut, you can choose by application. For example, if you want to make screenshot, by default with KDE, it is with the Spectac application. So you have to choose Spectac. On the right menu, you will see many actions and you can configure a combination of key. So on your KDE session, when you will press this key, it will execute that action. For Spectac, for example, you can configure a shortcut to take a screenshot of the entire desktop or only a section that you're going to draw with the mouse. Here it is to configure. If you have a touchscreen, you can configure action according to the movement you make. For example, if you configure the square on the left of the screen, the action you need to do is press the screen with your finger from the left to the center. And in this menu, you can configure the action that will be done when you will make the configure movement. If you have gaming controller, it is here you can configure it. On the next, we have the sound setting. So you will see your sound card, your sound input and output device. On my example, it is empty because my virtual machine didn't have any sound card configured. Here you will see your different screen. If you have two screens, you will be able to configure an extended display. So it will be possible to move the mouse from one screen to the other screen and move any application on the screen you want. You can also configure it with the clone mode. So both screen will display the same things. You can also configure the screen resolution here. We're not on the menu where we can configure the accessibility. Honestly, I'm not very familiar with this accessibility option. I don't really know what to say about them. But I know that here the screen reader, it is to read what it is displayed on the screen. So if this option interests you, you can check it to activate it. We see that Orca screen reader must be installed, and after that it should read the text display on your screen. For the Bluetooth device, if you want to connect any Bluetooth device, it is here you can do it. And when it will be connected, they will appear here. In my case, I don't have any Bluetooth adapter in my virtual machine. The next section is about the disk and camera. We can configure what we want the system do when we connect a camera or when we connect a removable disk. The possible action we can configure is open the file browser, download the photo with the GwenView application, or open it with VLC, for example. And here it is possible to configure, for example, which USB device will be known by your system. And it will be possible to configure, as example, an auto mount when this device will be connected to your machine. On the digital camera menu, it's another menu that I'm not very familiar because I don't have any digital camera. So I imagine that is the place where we can add our digital camera, and we will have different options to configure for that digital camera. We have the option for Thunderbolt. On my virtual machine, I don't have that. So I cannot show you how it looks, but if in your case you need to configure it, you will know where to find the option. For the printer menu, it is if you have a printer to configure on your Linux system. Wi-Fi and networking, this is for the network parameter. For example, your network card. If you want to connect your computer on a Wi-Fi network, you can configure different things manually. In this case, if you change it to manually, you can configure the IP address, the DNS server, the default gateway. So all network configuration can be done on this menu. The firewall configuration is the place to activate your firewall if it is not already activated. In my virtual machine, the firewall is not activated. It is the default setting on KDE Neon. If I want to activate it, I can just check the check mark in this window, and it will be possible to configure different rules on my firewall. as example, which program, which IP address, network port I want to be allowed by my Linux machine. The proxy option is useful if you have a proxy server on your network, if you need to pass through a proxy to go on internet, and other different configuration setting here. On this page, we are dealing with many technical networking things. Normally, there's no things to modify. And if you have to modify this option, normally you should know what are these different options. So change it only if you have a specific need in this network parameter. Otherwise, don't touch them. It is my recommendation. Normally, it is not necessary to change them. Here it is. If you want to connect KDE to a cloud service, for example, Google, Nextcloud, OnCloud. So after configure it, you will have some integration between KDE and this cloud service. I never really tested it too. I never connect my desktop interface to my cloud service. Here we have the theme, the different theme that you can configure. It is always possible to download a new one and install a new one. We have a button to browse the online library to get a new theme. On this section, it is not only possible to configure the entire theme, you can also customize each thing. As example, if you want to only change the color, the nightlight, the application style, the plasma style, it is always possible to configure things individually. You can configure the Windows decoration, the icon too, the cursor, the login screen. SDDM is the default one. It is possible to configure different sounds too and alert. We can configure a sound when a specific event happens in KDE. We can also configure the wallpaper here. We can choose an image from our system. We can add image too. We can also configure another source, as example Bing. So each day you will have a new wallpaper from the configured provider. We have Bing, but some other service too. Explore that menu if you want to see them. You can configure the text and the font from this menu. After, we have the default application that you want to use on your system. For example, you can choose your default internet browser, your default email software, your default music player, your default PDF viewer. In KDE 6, we have more options than in the older KDE version. It is nice to have it. And we can also configure the extension association. For example, which software you want to use for the MP4 file. For each extension, you can choose different applications. You have to put them in the order you want. The default one will be the first one. And for the other application, you will be able to use them when you choose the Open With menu. For example, if you are on your file browser, you just have to right-click on a file and you will see the Open With menu and choose the application you have configured for your file extension. Something useful you can do, it's for an image, as example PNG. You can choose a light software as default. So when you double click on the PNG file, it will open the light software to open it. And as other software, you can choose GIMP, Krita, or other applications to edit the image. And you will be able to right click on it, open with, and choose your photo editor to edit the file. Different things about the notification here. and several options about the Windows management. You can, for example, configure what it will happen if you double click on the top bar of a window. You can choose, for example, to maximize the window, to minimize the window, and different other options. As example, close the window. There are a lot of stuff you can customize in KDE. Personally, I always leave this option by default. We have different options for the task switching. You probably all know the Alt-Tab combination key, which allow you to change one window to the next one. Of course, it is possible to customize another shortcut to do this, but as default, it is the Alt and Tab key. Here we have desktop effects. A lot of effects can be configured. On the desktop effect, we have the blur effect as example, which allow us to see what is behind the window. We can also configure the virtual desktop here. In Linux, the virtual desktop exists since a long time. You can configure many virtual desktop. And here we can choose if you want them to be shown in one row or two rows. Basically, you can have applications open separate by virtual desktop. For example, you can have a Firefox open on one virtual desktop and another Firefox open on the other virtual desktop. And you can switch from one desktop to the other. You can do that with the icon about that on the KDE bar. But you can also configure a shortcut to switch to another virtual desktop. To modify the shortcut key, you have to go on the keyboard menu. We saw that menu earlier. So in this menu, you can configure different shortcuts for different applications. If you want to configure the shortcut about the virtual desktop, you have to click on Queen and search for option about desktop. So here we can configure a shortcut to switch one desktop down. Another key for the virtual desktop on the left. For this example, the default key is the meta key, control, and the left key. If you want to know what is the meta key, many people know that key as the Windows key. It's the keyboard key with the Windows logo on many keyboards. So if I have many virtual desktop and I press the meta, control, and right key, it will go on my virtual desktop to the right. We can also press the Control and F1 button to go on the first virtual desktop. Control F2 is to go on the second virtual desktop. We have the first 4 desktop already configured. If you have several more virtual desktop, it is possible to configure other shortcut, but by default, only the 4.1 have a shortcut. Here in the general behavior, a little thing to note is previously in the old version of KDE, you only have to click once to open a file or a folder if you were on your file manager. Personally, I always change it to select them. It will be now the default behavior for this option on KDE version 6. If I click once on a file, it will select it, and if I double click, it will open. It is like in a Microsoft Windows system. Of course, if you like the old way, it is possible to change the default option here on this menu. If you select the option open them, it will open the file if you only click with a one click on your file or folder. So this is a change in the new version of KDE 6 about this default behavior. And here we have the search parameter. It is possible to search and index your file. You can choose here the directory, and all files on this directory will be indexed. By default, it indexes the file name and the content of your file. What it means, if you search something on your KDE search menu, it will quickly search on your file name and file content. If you prefer, you can only index the file name, so it will search only on the file name. So choose what you want for your system. We can also choose what will be included on the search result. We have many things we can choose, as example, the bookmarks, the internet browser history, and we have full other stuff available here. The settings about the screen locking is to configure how long the screen will lock if you don't use your computer, and how long you can move your mouse to prevent the lock. When a system is locked, you have to enter your password when you want to reuse your current session. We can also configure a keyboard shortcut to lock the system. By default is the Meta and the L key. And the Meta key is the Windows key on many keyboards. Here we have the application permission. It is about the flatpak application. We can configure the permission. On my case, I don't have any flatpak package installed on my system, so I cannot show you how it will look, but you know you can configure it if you have flatpak application. On the recent file, you can configure how long you want to keep the history on your KDE session. It is not the history about your internet browser, it is about the recent file on your KDE session. You can choose as example the last month to only keep the last month. And the other option available, you can choose to not remember the history or configure to remember history for only a few applications. And the user feedback is to configure which statistic you want to be sent to the KDE team. The statistics will help them to improve KDE. You can specify different levels, so you can choose some basic information to be sent, and you can also choose detailed stuff to be sent. I invite you to read the list to see more in detail what will be sent. If you want to change your system language, is it on this menu? You have different settings about the time format, the currency format, etc. All about the language. And we have here the spell check. It is the one come with the KDE system. You can choose the language you want to use and configure some words you want to be ignored on this spell check. I never used the KDE spell check, so I cannot say if it is a good product and how to configure it and how to use it. Maybe I will try it one day and make a video about it. This option here is about the date and the time zone. You can choose your time zone. And the About System menu is to see different information for your system. You can have information about the software level, about the operation system. And in this one, we have the KDE version, the Linux kernel, the graphical engine, as example X11 or Wayland. And after that, you will see different things about your hardware, the number of the processor, the number of memory, the graphical card. And after that, we have different options about the energy saving. So the settings about the power manager is to configure when it will go on the sleep mode, when it will turn off the screen. To configure what to do after a period of inactivity. You can configure your computer to go on the sleep mode. As example, what to do when you press the power button, when to turn off the screen after inactivity period. On this menu, it's to configure some option about the software update. Do you want to manually do your software update, or you want it to be done automatically? You can choose the frequency. You want the system to do the software update or notify you if you choose the manually option. And do you want to install this update when you boot your system or immediately? On my case, I often choose after rebooting. So when I choose to install them, it will just download the update, and on the next reboot, it will install it. Here is the option to configure your user on your Linux system. You can create new user, you can configure their password, which type of account they are. Is it an administrator account or a user account? If you want an application to start automatically when you start your session, it is here you can choose it. It is not to configure a service, it's really just to configure an application. But this service can be configured here. So you can manage all services on your system Linux here. You can stop a service or you can start a service which is currently not running. So in other words, here it is the background service. And the session menu, you can also configure other options, as example, when you start your KDE session, which application will be open. You can choose an empty session, and it is normally that option I choose. But it is possible to configure to open all windows previously open on your previous session. So if you add Firefox open when you shut down your system, but Firefox will automatically open on your next session. And the option about the location, it is to configure default directory. For example, for your desktop, for your documents, for your download. So if you want another name for one of these folders, you can create a new folder or rename that folder and change the location here. It can be also useful if you change the language of your system and the folder name didn't change. It is possible to create a new folder with the correct new language and change it to choose your new folder here. So that was all for this video, where we pass all the different options about KDE 6 and many invaluable options we can configure on the system setting tools. And I hope that video was useful for you. For some menu, I didn't go in deep in my explanation. It can be something I can do on the comments. So if you need specific help about an option, don't hesitate to write it on the comments. And I will try to help you, or I will make a little research and testing on my system to try to help you. So I wish you a good day and bye bye.